technological difficulties. All right, Mark 15. We'll get to the end. We know we finished off. Really the progression of most of the Gospels. This is that last day. You start off with Gethsemane. You go to the arrest. You go right to the Sanhedrin. And then you go into Peter's denials, and then they turn him over to Pilate. All right. The main reason being that they did not kill him themselves is because they couldn't. By Roman law, they were not allowed to execute anyone. All right. So obviously, Jesus would not have been crucified had it been a Jewish trial and a Jewish verdict. It probably would have been stoning. The most likely would have been a stoning thing, which would have violated all of the scriptures, all the prophetic scriptures. And we know that Rome doesn't even start until 700 BC, and we're not sure exactly when crucifixion started anyway. But we do know the Romans were kind of the ones that really perfected this form of punishment. So we know 700 BC when most of the prophecies, especially Psalm 22, was given, David writes it around 1,000. And so it's 300-year preceding, really the only thing anybody knew about crucifixion, which is just amazing. It's just the beauty of that prophecy. So we have the Sanhedrin trial. We get the blasphemy charge. We talked last week about all the illegalities that were committed during that trial. So let's move on to 15:1. Let's just start reading. As soon as it was morning, and again, this is what's Peter's favorite word? What do we get at the beginning of almost every paragraph? Immediately. And this is that word. Where it says, as soon as it was morning, it's literally the word immediately. And immediately at morning, the chief priests had a meeting with the elders, scribes, and the whole Sanhedrin. After tying Jesus up, they led him away and handed him over. All right, this is the word for betray, parodidomi, all right, to hand over to Pilate. So Pilate asked him, are you king of the Jews? Which is a really odd question for Pilate just to jump in with and go right in. If you'll read the Luke version of this, the Luke version has them going to Pilate, and immediately they start to address these charges. He's subverting our nation. He's opposing taxes, and he's claiming himself to be king. Okay? Now, what Mark does is Mark kind of flips those. Mark says, Pilate comes out and just immediately asks him, are you the king? He says, you have said it. And then the chief priests start to make all the accusations. Luke just takes it and puts it in a better order. All right? That's what Luke says in the first chapter. First paragraph of his gospel, I'm writing you an orderly account. So I think it was a little bit of a jab at Mark and Peter in their writing of it. He says, they kind of got the order wrong on some things, so I want to make sure we get the order right. So they make the accusations. The final accusation in Luke's gospel was, he says he's the Messiah who would be a king. So Pilate turns and asks what question? Are you a king? Now, is this a serious question? You're Pilate. You're the governor of the region of Judea, all right? So basically all of Israel, Lebanon, all that area. You are sitting on the bema seat, all right? And you're asking this Jewish carpenter from the city of Nazareth, are you the king? Now, is that a serious question? No. What kind of way, how are we asking this question? Well, what if someone came to you and said, I'm the president of the United States? And you went, really? Are you really the president of the United States? You're not asking for information. You're asking just to clarify how insane this person is. All right, you with me? So this is the question. Are you the king of the Jews? And he answered, you have said it, or you say it. It's su lego. You said it, all right? Which can be, yes, I am, but it also can be, I know what you're trying to do. I know what you're trying to ask, and I'm just going to play along with it, but this is as far as I'm going with it, all right? And the chief priest, verse 3, and the chief priest began to accuse him of many things. Remember those things from Luke. Then Pilate questioned him again. Are you not answering anything? Because at this point, Jesus just shuts it down, all right? Why? Why does Jesus shut it down? Why does Jesus not answer anymore? He has the right to remain silent, all right? The verdict has already come in from the Sanhedrin. Pilate's going to go along with it. Pilate, in these accounts, Mark only says it one time, Luke has it 3 times, John has it 3 times. I find no charge, I find no charge, I find no charge. How many times have we talked about 3s in the Bible? God is holy, holy, holy. All right? When you get 3, it's that superlative. When things happen 3 times, you need to go, wait a second, that was important. All right? Mark only does it once. But he's just going to shut down. In verse 5, it says, but Jesus still did not answer anything, so Pilate was amazed. All right? Why is he so amazed? Because this guy's on trial for his life, and what's he doing? Just taking it. This amazed him. And I think this is one of those things that Mark writes from Peter's perspective, that the Roman people would have gone, that's pretty amazing to just sit there and take this. There's something to that, right? At this point in Luke's gospel, Pilate takes him and goes, oh, you're Galilean? Go to Herod. I'm going to see if I can get myself out of this. Pilate doesn't want any part of this, anything to this. This is not Pilate's. He's like, get me out of this. So he sends him to Herod, all right, who's the tetrarch over the region. So he was sort of the Jewish person in charge of certain regions, all right? Herod takes him and wants a show. Herod had never met Jesus. Herod really wanted to meet Jesus and hang out with Jesus because what? He'd heard Jesus doing all these what? All these miracles. He's like, I want to see this guy. All right? So they bring him in, and Herod gives him a purple robe. All right? Dresses him up like the king and is like, all right, do something cool. And Jesus just sits there. Because Herod has no power, A. He's not going to do anything to him. So Herod goes, get him out of here, and sends him back. But sends him back with what? What's he wearing? A purple robe. Okay, that's going to come in later. Okay, so that's in Luke's gospel. None of the other gospel writers mention that. Verse 6. At the festival, all right, what festival is this? Unleavened bread is starting up. What is the day? Passover. All right, so Passover leads right into the festival of unleavened bread. All right, on the Passover, what happened to the Jewish people at Passover? They escaped. All right, or the following morning. They got out of their enslavement, all right? So at the festival, it was Pilate's custom. John kind of flips it and says it was their custom, Jewish people's custom, to release for the people a prisoner they requested. Why? Because at Passover, what happened to the Jewish people? They were released, all right? So this became a custom. Who knows which one, if it was Pilate's custom that he came up with or if it was a long-standing custom. We just don't know. John's is just different than Matthew and Mark's. Verse 7, there was one named Barabbas, all right, who was in prison with rebels who had committed murder during the rebellion, all right? Now, there's a lot of very specifics right there, okay? We do get other translations, other kind of forms. He was a robber, he was a murderer, he was an insurrectionist and all this stuff. But Mark is very precise when he says he was in prison with rebels who had committed murder during the rebellion. So evidently it was well known that there was a rebellion in the early 30s that had taken place, and Barabbas was one of these guys, okay? Now, where does this put Barabbas? If you look at all those things, where does this put Barabbas on the how bad of a person were you in the eyes of Rome, all right? He was in prison with rebels. Do you rebel against the Romans? Do you? What happens to rebels? They die, all right? This is pretty much why they invented crucifixion, for anyone who would rebel. Why? Because you put people up on a major roadway, hang them up, and say, he rebelled. And why they put signs up there. He was a rebel. So the next time that person comes along and goes, hey, we're thinking about putting together a rebellion, you go, I don't think so. I'm good, all right? I will live in these conditions. That's not going to happen to me. So Barabbas was a rebel who had committed murder during a rebellion, all right? Now, when you murder someone in a rebellion, who is the victim of that murder? If you're rebelling against the Romans, who would you have killed? A Roman. All right, now not only were you just in a rebellion, but you also killed a Roman soldier in the midst of a rebellion. Where would he be on the totem pole of who's going to die first? All right, you see what I'm saying here? All right, so, and I love the way that God portrays this because he takes the very worst possible criminal. Even in Jewish law, I mean, you go through the 10 Commandments, the first really specific one with an actual crime attached to it is what we're going to talk about Sunday is what? Thou shalt not murder, all right? Honor your father and mother, that's kind of the umbrella. Do not murder is number one. So not only in Roman law would he be number one, but also in Jewish law. He would have been number one criminal, and which is so cool because God takes this worst possible criminal of all time, and what's he going to do with Jesus and the worst criminal of all time? Change places. So if you ever wonder, I don't know if I'm good enough. I don't know if I've done some really bad things, which I always ask people, have you ever committed murder? Have you ever rebelled? Okay, Jesus switched places with that guy, all right? So I just wanted you to see the evilness that is Barabbas. I always want to know what happened to him. There's been a couple of movies that have come out with sort of fictional stories about what happened to Barabbas after and all this stuff. Who knows? I wish we had. I wish I had a whole book of all these characters that come along that you wonder what happened to them. The woman caught in adultery, Bartimaeus, this Barabbas, all these guys. All right. Verse 8. The crowd came up and began to ask Pilate to do for them as was his custom. So Pilate answered them, do you want me to release the king of the Jews for you? Little stab right there, all right? The crazy guy. For he knew it was because of envy that the chief priests had handed him over. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd so they would release Barabbas to them instead. Pilate asked them again, then what do you want me to do with the one you call, very interesting, all right? You got to understand, the Romans just hated the Jews. They were such a nuisance because these people had freedom just in their spirit and in their heart, and they just would not submit. And they didn't like these Jewish people because they always fought, and they just wore them out. We don't like these people. So he takes this shot that you call king of the Jews. And again, they shouted, crucify him. Then Pilate said to them, why? What has he done wrong? What kakos has he done? Literally is that word kakos. What kakos has he done? Which is what implication is what? What does Pilate see as his kakos, his crime? Well, besides he may be mentally unstable. But what's he asserting? He's done nothing wrong. So he's asking him, you guys tell me what he's done wrong, and I'll consider that. All right? But they shouted, crucify him all the more. Then, willing to gratify the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas to them, and after having Jesus flogged, he handed him over to be crucified. All right? Now, why was Pilate willing to gratify the crowd? He doesn't like these people. They're annoying. All right? They're always asking for stuff. They're just under his skin. Why not just go, you know what? I don't like you guys, and I know you handed this poor guy over just because you're envious of him, so I'm going to let him go just to mess with you. All right? Why does he not do that? Okay, let me give you a little backstory. Okay? We've got a guy about this time, or at the Emperor's Tiberius. Tiberius says, I'm done. I'm going to my island. I'm going to do my thing on my island. Sejanus, you kind of take over. All right? So this guy named Sejanus comes into power, and he is sort of the emperor's right-hand man, and he starts putting all these people in place, especially a guy named Pilate. All right? Well, Tiberius gets word through his sister that Sejanus is trying to take over the empire. So Tiberius comes back and goes, excuse me, what do you think you're doing? All right? He's busted, he gets killed, and they start to go throughout the empire and find everybody that Sejanus put in power and question whether or not they are loyal to Caesar or loyal to Sejanus. And anybody who failed that test, executed, crucified probably. All right? So Pilate is sitting there 2 years later going, I better play this pretty clean. And the one thing Rome hated was riots. If you could not keep the order as governor, you were killed. all right? And we know in one of the Gospels they throw out, if you release this guy who calls himself king, then you are what? No friend of Caesar's. If you're Sejanus, are you going to go, that's it, I'm standing on principle, not killing this Jesus guy, not killing this whatever prophet from Nazareth? Or do you go, wash my hands of this, I got nothing to do with this, y'all do whatever you want to him? Which do you do if you're Pilate and you're being tested now? Because they know what's going on, and so that's why they say that if you release him, you are no friend of Caesar's, okay? So a lot of this comes into play. So Pilate's like, done, get him out of here. I'm not going to get in the way of this. I'm not going to lose my life because of this guy, okay? So he is having Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. 16, the soldiers led him away into the courtyard, that is the headquarters of the Praetorian, all right, and called the whole company together. So they bring all the soldiers together. They're going to have a little fun with this guy. They dressed him in a purple robe. That's probably they left him in that purple robe given to him by Herod. They twisted a crown of thorns and put it on him. This is where I love the visual of this because it's so depictive of what they would do to a sacrifice. The guilty party, when it was offering the animal sacrifice, would come and would literally lay their hands on the head of the sacrifice. Doing what? Imputing their sins from their hands onto the head of the sacrificial animal. So I've always asked the question, when did anyone ever touch Jesus' head? Did anyone ever lay their hands on the head of Jesus and let that be sort of this imputation of sin onto the person and the sacrificial atoning lamb of Christ? And there it is right there. They put the crown of thorns on his head. It's never mentioned in Scripture. You can do with it what you want to. I just see that and I go, bam, there it is. The sins of the world were laid on his head. They began to salute him or hail him. Hail, King of the Jews. Or what are they doing here? They put a purple robe, a crown of thorns, and they're going, oh, hail, King of the Jews. All right, again, they're messing with him. They're Romans. They hate the Jewish people. Know that. Just keep that in your mind. They kept hitting him on the head with a reed and spitting on him. Getting down on their knees, they were paying homage. When they had mocked him, they stripped him of the purple robe and put his own clothes on him and led him out to crucify him. Now, what's interesting is in 2 Samuel 7, all right, this is the Davidic covenant, all right, you can think about this later. The Davidic covenant is given. David is told, your son will reign an eternal reign. This is the whole messianic prophecy. He will be the king forever, the eternal king. And he says, but here's the thing. When he becomes unrighteous, doesn't say when he does unrighteous things. When your son, this son of yours, becomes unrighteous, which what happens? The sins of the world are placed on him. Now, what has he become? Unrighteous. God tells David, when your son becomes unrighteous, he will receive the blows of men, but I will not take my faithful Hesed love away from him. And what do we see? He receives the imputation of sin, and what immediately follows? The blows of men, all right? So they're hitting him with this reed, mocking him, and then they let him out, just to mess with him, just to crucify him. And this is all a prophetic thing going back to Psalm 22 especially. All right, 21. They forced a man coming in from the country who was passing by to carry Jesus' cross, which is always interesting to me because I'm asking the question, whose cross was Jesus carrying? Was it his? Yes. Why? Because how did he become sinful and therefore merit the cross? By taking my sin. So Jesus is carrying my cross. Simon of Cyrene is going to carry Jesus' cross. All right? He was Simon of a Cyrenian, the father of Alexander and Rufus. Very interesting here. When can you imagine, or can you remember a time anywhere in the scriptures where a father was identified with his children? This is Bob, father of Frank and George. This is pretty much the only time in Scripture we ever get this kind of direct reference, all right? Okay, so Mark is writing this from Peter's perspective while they're in Rome. Paul writes at about this same time a letter to the Roman church. You with me? And in Romans 16, he says, greet Rufus, one who is chosen by God. Now, if Paul is writing this to the Roman church, and there's a guy in the Roman church named Rufus, and Mark is over here saying, this guy named Simon, a Cyrenian, whose kids were Alexander and Rufus, that would put Rufus, the same guy, in Rome, writing from these two perspectives. Interesting thought. We don't know. There's no way to prove it, obviously. But it's an interesting thought because it's the only time it's the father of Alexander and Rufus. Some people even go and say, well, what if this Alexander was the one who was called into the riot at Ephesus? What is it? I'm trying to think what chapter that would have been. It doesn't matter. Alexander is called up on stage, and immediately they recognize him. He was a Jew, and they boot him off the stage before he even gets a word out. But, who knows? Alexander is a much more common name than Rufus would have been. So anyway, you can go back and look at Romans 16, and you can see that reference, and then you see this one here, and you're like, I wonder if this could be the same guy. It just makes for an interesting conversation. And they brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means skull place. They tried to give him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. Then they crucified him. That's the only detail we get about the crucifixion of Jesus. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. The only detail we get is, and they crucified him, period. We do not know what shaped cross. We do not know what the nails were like. We don't know anything about the crucifixion. Now, we know secondhand later on, he says, look at my wounds. So we get the wounds in his wrists and his side and his feet, all right? But beyond that, just in the actual things, all we get was, and they crucified him, period, all right? Very well could be. Yeah, they all knew what crucifixion looked like. Yeah. I've always found it interesting that we have all these details about the trial and what was said, and then the climax of the gospel story, the crucifixion of Christ on behalf of our sin. Did what? Yes. Yeah, those details would have been unique. The crucifixion would have been common. Right. Because simply the way he died. Yeah. All right. I just always think it's interesting. You get like 4 words. Then they crucified him. Period. And they divided his clothes, casting lots for them to decide what each would get. John has the detail where they had that one garment that they didn't want to tear. That was added, 30 years after Mark. John writes that detail in there. So. Now it was 9 a.m, or the third hour, if you want to be King Jamesy, all right? It was the third hour. You start at 6 a.m. and you count up from there, okay? So it's the third hour or the 9 a.m. when they crucified him. The description of the charge written against him was the King of the Jews. They crucified 2 criminals with him, one on his right, one on his left, so the scripture would be fulfilled that says, and he was counted among outlaws. Those who passed by were yelling insults at him, shaking their heads and saying, the one who would demolish the sanctuary and build it in 3 days, save yourself by coming down from the cross. In the same way, the chief priests and the scribes were mocking him to one another, saying, he saved others, he cannot save himself. Let the Messiah, the King of Israel, come down now from that cross so that we may see, observe, Ido, and believe. Even those who were crucified with him were taunting him. Now, Luke's version is the one that comes back and says there was the thief on the cross who, after some time, says, he's done nothing wrong. Remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus replies to him, what? Today you shall be with me in paradise. That's Luke's version. Luke is very passionate, very emotional, so he would have brought this out. All right. But Mark doesn't include that. Matthew doesn't include it. Neither does John. All right. And notice what they said. They said, the one who would demolish the sanctuary and rebuild it in 3 days. Again, the only reference we have to that was in John's gospel, in John 2, when he is cleansing the temple. And they say, by what authority you do this? And he says, tear this down and I will rebuild it in 3 days. Again, that's very early in John's gospel. I don't believe they remembered for 3 years that he had said that. I would go with John's recording something that happened 3 days before the crucifixion. Just my opinion. Take it for what it's worth. All right. When it was noon or the 6th hour, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. Period. What do you do with that? You go, it was dark. All right, let's move on. All right. So for 3 hours, we get darkness. And at 3, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which is translated, my God, why have you forsaken me? Which is the very first line of what psalm? Psalm 22. Now, no one back there was going, he's quoting Psalm 22. They would have said, he's singing the psalm, my God, why have you forsaken me? The first line was always the title that would be attributed to it, okay? So, and most people would say he is referencing this as an actual statement, but he's also kind of pointing to all of us and going, you need to go look up the psalm, my God, why have you forsaken me, which we've numbered as 22. And what you find in there is basically one thing after another of prophetic verses that talk about the crucifixion, all the details. If you want to paint a picture of the crucifixion, you can go to Psalm 22 and paint all the pictures that you see in Psalm 22, and you'll have a fairly accurate portrait of the crucifixion. It's just that good. It's just that accurate, okay? So he cries out in this. When some of these standing there heard this, they said, look, he's calling for Elijah. Why? Because he used that Eloi, Eloi. It would sound like he was saying something about Elijah. And the people know that before the kingdom comes, that Elijah will come first, which cryptically it was John the Baptist. And now they're going, he's calling for Elijah to come. Maybe he is the Messiah. We just don't know what's going on. But they're like, hey, get him something to drink so he can actually talk and whatever. So someone ran and filled a sponge with sour wine, fixed it on a reed, offered him a drink, and said, let's see if Elijah comes to take him down. Why? Because what would that signal? If Elijah comes and takes him down, he was the Messiah. Yay, probably not good for those guys that just crucified him, but those are Romans, and he's supposed to destroy the Romans anyway, so what do we have to lose? All right? 37. But, very, very, very key word, but, because what they were looking for was, and Jesus was carried off by Elijah and destroyed the Romans, and they lived happily ever after. Mark writes, but Jesus let out a loud cry and breathes his last. Again, Peter would have thought that. That's what Peter would have thought in his head. But instead of Elijah coming, Jesus died. This is why when Jesus gives a prediction of his death, Peter says, oh, no. That's not going to happen to you. And Jesus says, what? Get behind me, Satan. You're getting in front of me. You're getting ahead of me thinking that I'm the Messiah who's going to destroy the Romans. No. You need to get behind me and just see what happens. All right? But Jesus let out a loud cry and breathed his last. We have several different versions of what Jesus actually says in this moment. I think Luke says, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. It is finished is another one that gets thrown. I think that's John. Into your hands is Luke. All right. So we get a few phrases in there like that. The Father forgive them, but they know not what they do. That was more as they were crucifying him. All right. Or even before that. Sometimes some people say it was during that flogging that he actually says that, which kind of runs right into the crucifixion in some of the translations. So, all right. But Mark just has very simple. All right. Why? Because who's writing it? Peter is. What kind of way? How does Peter write? Very quick. Boom, 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 boom. Facts. All right. 38. Then the curtain of the sanctuary. What sanctuary? The temple. Yeah. This would be in, we had the court of women a couple of weeks ago where Jesus was watching, all right, and observing the woman dropping her 2 mites into the treasury. You go beyond that, you get into the court of men. You go beyond that, you go into the holy place, which is where the lampstand would be over here, the bread of the presence here, the incense altar would be here, and there would be this huge veil, about the size of a volleyball court, all right? So about 30 by 60. I mean, this huge veil, 60 feet high. It was 4 inches thick, they say. Now think of a tapestry that's 4 inches thick, okay? That's a pretty big curtain right there, all right? So this is this curtain, and it would hold between the holy place and the most holy place, or the Holy of Holies, which housed what? At the moment, nothing, because the Ark of the Covenant wasn't there anymore, all right? But that's where the Ark of the Covenant was. The presence of God was back there. So you have this huge veil, or this curtain was there. And this curtain of the sanctuary was split into, and I love the detail here, from what? Top to bottom, which means what? If it's 60, I think it was like 75 feet high. If it's about 60 feet high in the air, who's crawling up there and doing one of these guys with a 4-inch thick veil? That's where the details. This wasn't like some simple curtain, a piece of cloth that it just tore. All right? Something bigger than us tore that thing from top to bottom. All right? That's why each of the Gospels, every single one of the Gospels mentions that. All right? When the centurion, who was standing opposite him, or, just across from him is maybe a better way of saying it, saw the way he breathed his last, he said, "This man really was God's son." Now, is that a profession of faith? This was the God's Son, the Christ, the Messiah, and therefore I will worship him. For a Roman soldier to say this was God's Son, or the Son of God, right? He's probably not making a profession of faith in God, the Jewish God. He's probably making a very broad statement of this guy was like a son of one of the gods. Okay, everybody with me? I think we attached way too much meaning to this one. He saw something special, all right? He did not necessarily go, I now identify with the Jewish God, and that must be his son, who is the Messiah, who I will place my faith in. That's a big leap to go there, but he saw something there that impressed him enough to refer to him as the son of a God, or the son of God in some context. All right. There were also women looking on from a distance. This is the word theoreo. We get a word theater. They were observing this like they were kind of watching a movie. All right. So there were also women looking on from a distance. Among them were Mary Magdalene. All right. Very first time Mary Magdalene is ever mentioned in the Gospel of Mark. All right. If you watch The Chosen, the very first scene in The Chosen is Mary Magdalene, and she is a prominent character throughout. I'm not saying that that's not accurate. I'm just saying this is the very first time that Mark mentions her, okay? And how does he describe her? Among them were Mary Magdalene. Any description at all? None whatsoever. Luke refers to her in Luke 8 as a woman from whom Jesus had cast out 7 demons, okay? So the very first time Luke mentions her, he goes, oh, by the way, this is Mary Magdalene. 7 demons came out of her. She's awesome, okay? And I love the way the Chosen is portraying her. Such a beautiful testimony in episode 2. You see her in episode 1, you see her in episode 2, and I love her line. She says, I was one way, and now I'm a whole different way, and the difference was him. That's the gospel right there. That's Christianity 101 right there. I was one way, and now I'm this way, and the difference was him. I just love that. And besides that whole 7 demons, it's just amazing. So among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James the younger and of Joseph. All right, a lot of people identify this as Mary the mother of Jesus, and Salome, which some people equate with the mother of James and John. We just don't know. All right, probably related in there. When he was in Galilee, they would follow him and help him. Many other women had come up with him to Jerusalem for the festival, for Passover and all this stuff, okay? When it was already evening, because it was preparation day, that is the day before the Sabbath, Joseph of Arimathea, a prominent member of the Sanhedrin, which throws a wrench in the whole Sanhedrin, condemned him to death, right? You also throw Nicodemus in there, a member of the Sanhedrin. So if the whole Sanhedrin is condemning Jesus to death, then Joseph of Arimathea condemns him to death, watches him die, and then goes, I want the body, I'm going to put him in my personal tomb. What kind of Jewish Sanhedrin member would put a criminal that he had just condemned for blasphemy into his own tomb? You with me? Which draws the conclusion what? It wasn't the whole Sanhedrin. It wasn't all of them. Possibly there wasn't even a quorum present. We just don't know. All right? Because he was a prominent member of the Sanhedrin who was himself looking forward to the kingdom of God, came and boldly went into Pilate and asked for Jesus' body. Pilate was surprised that he was already dead. Summoning the centurion, he asked him whether he had already died. When he found out from the centurion, he gave the corpse to Joseph. After he bought some fine linen, he took him down and wrapped him in the linen. Then he placed him in a tomb cut out of rock and rolled a stone against the entrance to the tomb. Now Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph, were watching where he was placed. Why? Because they're going to come back and anoint the body later on. There's some urgency to the burial because they've got to get him buried before that third star is seen in the sky. Okay? Now, what happens next? That was Friday. The 6th day. What happens on the 7th day? What does God do on the 7th day of the week of creation? Why? Because what happened at the end of the 6th day? He went what? It is finished. So on the 7th day, he rested. Jesus does what on the 7th day? On the Sabbath. Sabbath, same idea, same word, okay? Shiva, all right, he rests. That's why I believe in a 6-day creation, because it just keeps lining up that way, okay? So you got to just kind of pause. You got to let it rest. Because what are the disciples doing on this 7th day, this Sabbath day, this Saturday? What do they want to do? I think they want to run. I think they want to run home. They were done. I'm out. We see the Emmaus boys. We've talked about this a lot over the last couple of months. The Emmaus boys waited until Sunday. Why? Because now they could actually travel. You could only go 0.7 miles. Emmaus was 7 miles away. They couldn't go home, so they just had to sit and pray that the Romans didn't come find them. All right? Chapter 16. We'll run through these verses real quick. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome, again, that same little trio, brought spices so they could go anoint him. Why? Because he had been raised from the dead. They needed to anoint him in his new life. Why are they going to anoint the body of Jesus? What did they believe of him? He was dead. And where were all the people sitting outside the tomb waiting for Jesus to be raised from the dead, to be resurrected? Where's that crowd? Where's the parade? Where's the band? No one believed Jesus was going to rise from the dead. The women go, maybe even his mother goes to anoint his dead body because they all think he's dead. So very early in the morning on the first day of the week, they went to the tomb at sunrise. Why? Because now you can do that. They were saying to one another, who will roll away the stone from the entrance to the tomb for us? Which is a great question because, 3 women, this is a massive stone they were looking at. Looking up, they observed the stone, which was very large, had been rolled away. When they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a long white robe, sitting on the right side. They were amazed and alarmed. Okay, so get the scene in your head. They're walking up. They're going, who's going to roll the stone away? The stone's been rolled away, and a man's sitting there, young man. With the rich young ruler, same idea, same word is used to describe him. All right, so it was a young man dressed in a long white robe. Do not be alarmed, he told them. You are looking for Jesus the Nazarene, who was crucified. He has been resurrected. He is not here. See the place where they put him. But go tell his disciples and Peter. Now, if you've never considered the whole dynamics of the Gospel of Mark, you would just read right through that. Peter throws himself a little bone right there. All right. He is going ahead of you to Galilee, which he promised them when he said, you will all run away. But after all this goes down, I'm resurrected, meet me in Galilee. Which again, what did they hear? They didn't hear any of that. So he is going ahead of you to Galilee. You will see him there just as he told you. So they went out and started running from the tomb because trembling and astonishment overwhelmed them. They said nothing to anyone since they were afraid. Period. End of story. That's how the Gospel of Mark ends. Now, what's wrong with that ending? We get the women who run to the tomb. The man says, hey, he's not here. He's been resurrected. Go tell the disciples and Peter what happened. They are afraid. They run off from the tomb, and they tell no one since they were afraid. Now, I know you have 9 through 20 in your translation, all right? But anybody see the big fat bracket in front of 9? Okay? Let me go through a little bit because I am utterly convinced, because I wrote a paper on this, and so I just read 20 pages of a theological paper this afternoon about it. First off, that last word in verse 8 is the Greek word gar, which is our word for for. Now, how many of you end a sentence with the word for, F-O-R? If you have, exactly, you should not. And it kills me because the Holman translation does this way too often. It ends sentences with prepositions or with these conjunctions. You would never, ever, ever in any circumstance end a sentence, much less a book, with the word gar in Greek, okay? So it ends abruptly. Some people say it just got ripped off, torn off, whatever. Some people say Mark kind of left it hanging like that because he wanted to maintain this messianic secret and let the reader kind of fill in the blanks. And there's a lot of theories on this, but you get several things. The vocabulary is different in 9 through 20. Different words are used that are not common to the Gospel of Mark. The style in which it was written, the content is crazy. One person said the flavor was more 2nd century. It's not as graphic and not as written in sort of Peter's format. What does Peter do? He just gives you facts. He likes to keep the story moving, keeps the story moving. It actually copies Matthew and Luke, where much of Matthew and Luke is copied from Mark. So it kind of reverses that order. So it's as if somebody read Matthew and Luke and went, well, we can't end the story with the way Mark ends it, or the transcript we have. So let's add what Matthew and Luke wrote, and let's put it on the back of Mark, which is kind of reverse of how it had been written all along. There is one theory, a man named Aristion in 989 wrote. The theory is that he wrote it 1,000 years after the fact, okay? Well, I'll give you one clue, and you can see this, and then we'll look at the signs real quick. Early on the first day of the week, look in verse 9. Early on the first day of the week, after he had risen, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, out of whom he had driven 7 demons. All right? Why do you not mention that earlier? Is he introducing Mary to the audience? Is this the first time Mary Magdalene has been mentioned? Because that's when you introduce people, right? Hey, this is Mary Magdalene. I forgot to tell you, she had had 7 demons cast out of her. No, somebody's reintroducing her as a character. Not only that, verse 10, she went and reported to those who had been with him as they were mourning and weeping. Well, in verse 8, what did it say? They said nothing to anyone since they were afraid. But then in verse 10, she reports to everyone. Do you see that combination of reintroducing Mary Magdalene and now she's reporting when previously she had not reported? If you get into 17, this is where the craziness kind of drops in the bucket. And these signs will accompany those who believe in Jesus. In my name, they will drive out demons. They will speak in new languages. They will pick up snakes. And if they should drink anything deadly, it will never harm them. They will lay hands on the sick, and they will get well. It doesn't say they might get well. It doesn't say that God may provide that healing. It just says this is what will happen. So do you get the feel of backwoods, trailer park, church, Texas, Georgia? We have those in North Georgia, all right? So like I said, this is where you kind of get the crazy mixed into the bucket along the mix. And so it clearly, under no circumstances, is 9 through 20 accurate. Well, I don't want to say it's not accurate. It's just not Mark. Mark did not write this. It's just, and it's okay. We have Matthew's gospel, we have Luke's gospel, we have John's gospel. It gives a full picture of the resurrection. We don't necessarily need it. So that's why when you start to do this, you may want to say it because that crazy gets dropped in the bucket there in 17, and you don't want to go there. Plus, 15 and 16 starts to go into the idea of if you're not baptized, then you cannot be saved, which completely contradicts the thief on the cross. Because what did the thief on the cross do? He got saved. He was told, you will be with me in paradise. And then what happened? When did he get baptized? So it would totally contradict this. So we get some bad theology thrown into this on this backside. That's why I always completely avoid it and just go, we don't know what happened. Maybe Mark left it that way just to let the story hang out there. All right? Who knows? Who knows? All right. Any questions? Come on, Ashley. You know you have a question. Holland says you're not allowed to have questions. Only one question. It was not dictated. The question is whether the flogging was mandatory. It never says that Pilate ordered him to be flogged and then crucified. He handed him over, and he was flogged. You could probably throw in to be flogged. But I think that was just their practice of humiliation, and it also would speed up the death process, which was not necessarily the goal. I think they were just messing with him because he was Jewish, personally, all right? And we don't get, the cat of nine tails. We don't get any of those details in there. All we know is he was flogged. That could be a simple whipping, or that could be a full-on flesh ripped off his back. One thing that concerns me with people when we tell the crucifixion story, and that's why I wanted to point out, the only details of the crucifixion is, and they crucified him. And then and he was flogged. And I think we add a lot of these details and we sensationalize it. And I think sometimes what's dangerous for me and what as a pastor and a preacher and a teacher, I don't want to sensationalize things so that you lose the train of the gospel message and you get distracted by was it the cat of nine tails? Was his flesh really ripped off? Was there really glass and bone in this? And all of a sudden, we become the people who can't stop staring at the train wreck. And we completely miss the progression of what happened on that day, that he took those, by his stripes I was healed. We get caught up in what were the stripes like? How deep were the cuts? This is why I don't go there when it talks about Jesus in Gethsemane. He was sweating drops of blood. I don't need that. There's nothing scriptural, and he had to sweat drops of blood. No. Luke just writes, and his sweat was like drops of blood. I'm thinking if I'm Peter and I see him coming back and he's got blood dripping down his face, I'm going, Jesus, what happened? I mean, not in like a... I said that kind of flippantly. Jesus Christ, what happened? No, literally. No, I don't want us to get sidetracked by the details and lose the flow of what actually took place, because that's the beauty of it. It's not in the graphic nature. It's not in those details. If it's prophetic, yeah, absolutely, I'm all in. But if it's not prophetic and if it doesn't lend itself to the flow of that narrative, I think we got to be careful, because we can sensationalize things. I know, especially as a youth, as a young person, I would get distracted by those points, and I don't want to do that. I want to tell the pure story. of the gospel. And so, anyway. All right. Anything else? Thank you for being here. I've enjoyed teaching through this. Michael Card taught me at the Cove 2 years ago, year ago. I forget how long it's been now. And so it's been good to be able to refresh my mind and think through this and talk through this. And again, I always tell people, if you want to read through the Bible, if you want to start reading the Bible, just read Mark. Because the details are there, and it's easy, and it flows real well, and you can see the whole picture. The last place I would send people is John. It's just me. Because John, you're going, oh my goodness, that's like a 4-page dialogue or monologue of Jesus talking, and he's talking about eating flesh and drinking blood, and you after a while, you kind of go, whoa, where is this going? All right, and so much of it is at the Last Supper. So I always tell people, Mark. Okay, let me pray for us, and we'll go. Father, thank you for letting us study your word. I thank you for preserving it for these 2,000 years, keeping it safe for us. I thank you for just the country that we live in, where we can gather and we can discuss your scriptures. We can look at your word. We can exalt, magnify, glorify, and thank you for Jesus anytime we want to in this setting. So, Father, I just thank you for an opportunity to be here. I thank you for each and every person that's been so faithful to continue to come and learn and to be discipled and to study your word. Father, I pray that you would just bless us and continue to help us to do that here in this church so that this church can be a true beacon of light and not just of popular sentiments and warm fuzzies, but we could truly bring your gospel and your message to people so that they can know something that's real and true and beautiful and valuable. Father, I pray for our youth as they're at youth camp. I pray that you would just bless this night, that you would just really start to invade hearts. I pray for your spirit to have just free reign in that place, that our youth would just sense and know your beauty and the love that you have for them, and that it would change lives, that would change destinies, Father. I just beg and plead for that right now. But again, Father, thank you for our time of Bible study, and I thank you for each person you've gathered here today. In Jesus' name, amen.